When my son, who I call on the internet Moochie, was born 7 years, a little over 7 years, 7.5 years ago now, I started a hand-spun, hand-knit blanket for him. And when my daughter Beans was born, she is 5 now, going on 6, I wanted to do the same thing for her, but I thought I would do a woven blanket this time. And, best intentions or whatever, I spun all the yarn, I warped the loom, I wove half of the blanket, and then I could not keep up with the project with 2 littles in diapers, and it sat on the loom for over close to 3 years, I think. It wasn't until this past April 2025, that I finally went back to finish the blanket for her. I just wanted to make sure it was done. It was really important to me that I got it finished and off of the loom. So this is the little video story of that. Just the end. I didn't really record any of the weaving parts, but this is the fun part, right? Watching it come off the loom. The process I used for this, or at least, besides just that it's woven, the blanket is woven all in one piece. I left some blank warp in the middle, which then became tassels later. And then I basically cut the long length in half and sewed the 2 halves together to make sure they were the same length. I tied little neon yarn flags onto a piece of cotton twine, which I think you can see here while I'm pulling it off the loom. It's wrapped up on the side. So there's one, the neon yellow, and here's a neon orange one. Those are spaced a foot apart, and it just let me keep track of how far I had gone. One of the big problems I ran into with this was that you can see I used a lot of art yarn in this. This blanket is about 90% hand spun. There is some commercial yarn in there. The art yarn, especially the really art yarn, is thick. There's some yarn with even ribbon inclusions and stuff in here. And that heavy grist yarn accumulates diameter on the warp rod at a much faster rate than the more even yarns and smaller, lighter weight yarns. So what ended up happening was I ran out of warp on the yarns were the same length, but I ran out of warp early on the thicker yarn, which wound up being a problem, which I solved by adding this clasp warp with these dark purple and dark blue yarns here. This worked, and at one point I had to actually back the whole thing off and then reweave on the front end a little bit, which luckily I had left a lot of wiggle room. But of course that did add some length overall, right? Because even though those heavy grist yarns wound up faster because they accumulated diameter faster, they were still the same length as the other yarns. And this extra length did wind up creating a problem eventually, which I will share with you in one of the later parts of this video. But basically, I had assumed that I would have about 10 to 11% shrinkage. And these are my hand spun yarns that I had already pretty aggressively wet set. Anyway, that does become a problem for me later on, but more about that when we get there. For now, you can watch me struggle trying to get this massive piece of fabric folded in half so that I can check that both sides are the same length. And by the way, I will also probably post at some point a full-length video of this. Some of this I recorded in time-lapse, but others of it I'm just speeding up in CapCut. I don't know when I'll post that. I'll probably make it today, because today is my last day with CapCut on my subscription, and then I'm not going to renew it until we find out what's actually going on with TikTok and ByteDance. But anyway, here it is. It was actually really close. Honestly, probably less than an inch different, although the fabric's a little bit wrinkly, so it's a little bit hard to tell here. That will actually work itself out as I'm stitching it together after I cut it in half, which is what I'm doing here. This is the space that I left in the warp. For this part of the project, I just need to sew the two halves together. So to do that, first I have to get them to lie flat next to each other, which is actually like harder than it should be with such big floppy pieces of fabric, I guess. With that done, I'm ready to sew the two halves together, which I plan to do with a big fat cross stitch right up that middle seam using some of the Handspun yarn. In my opinion, that will look better and be more aesthetically cohesive for the finished product than it would be to, say, run it under the sewing machine. But what is kind of obnoxious about it is that I need to drag this huge tail of yarn all the way up one side and then all the way back down to make the X's for the cross stitch. I've made a couple blankets like this before, but this is the biggest one, and like I intimated earlier, it's much longer than I wanted it to be even. But yeah, here's some close-up shots of the fabric. I'm just really happy with how it came out. I think, like I mentioned a couple times now, it is all different sizes yarn, all different kinds of things, so it is going to be uneven. That's part of the plan. It's going to have a very homespun look because it is homespun. But you can see there's like some real loose stuff. That will tighten up while I wash it.
I can't even do the rhythm.
All right, go get ready for your bath.
Bye,
Martina. It was actually super hard to record sewing this with one hand, so I didn't get very much of it, but here we go, almost done, just a few stitches to go, and then it will be ready for its bath.
Mommy,
Yeah, baby.
I made these two things for you.
What'd you make, baby? Oh, those are beautiful.
They're my little spirograph.
Oh, yeah? I love those little spirograph
Wait,
things.
this one is a bit tilted.
How pretty.
And I put in rainbow color hearts on the bottom. But you see, I didn't have an orange marker with that spirograph.
Yeah.
So I made orange with red and yellow.
I like
That's
that.
why
Wow, that
orange-
was really smart.
That's why orange goes between yellow and red.
That's a really convincing orange, too. All right. Thank you so much, Beanzu. All right, so this blanket is sewn together at this point and ready to go into its bath. This was the point at which I expected to lose 10 to 11% in every dimension to shrinkage, except for, I guess, thickness, right? It kind of would puff up. Just filling up a bath with lukewarm water and some eucalan, which is a really gentle detergent that's safe for example, hand-spun wool. This is not made with superwash treated wool, so I mean, I think there is actually some superwash wool in there, but for the most part, it's just regular like merino wool and other wool. So yeah, it will felt, so we gotta be careful. I wasn't sure if it would fit in the spin dryer, and it was right about here that I realized that I hadn't taken into account that since this is like 90% hand spun, I had already washed and set the yarn, so it was effectively pre-shrunk. Which means that while I expected 10 to 11% shrinkage in length, I didn't get that shrinkage after I washed it. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but you will see when I go to hang it up to dry that it's actually really huge. And I had intended it to be used either folded in half in the winter or not folded in half for warmer weather. But honestly, even not folded in half, it's wool. It's kind of hot for spring and summer warmer days. So beans can use it, for the winter only. And I don't know, maybe someday I will cut across and re-hem it and stuff so that it's just two smaller blankets, but not right now. Anyway, this is the blanket after it's been wet finished and hung up to dry. And after this, all I have to do is trim all of the loose warp and weft ends and it will be all done. Yeah, it's really long. It's folded in half here and it basically reaches from the shower rod all the way down to the edge of the bathtub. It wasn't quite touching, but almost. Anyway, this was after letting it dry. It was really most of the way dry after the spin dryer. I think it only took a day or so. Then we are ready to go in and trim all these ends. Now, there in the center, you're just seeing weft ends, which there are still many. But here at the ends, you see all the warp ends from that massive clasped warp. And it is massive. And if I remember correctly, I want to say I think it was close to 260 warp ends that I had to do a clasped warp on either side. So 450, 500 of these things to carefully snip. It's a lot. Luckily, the way I did it, at least once this big part was over, I didn't really have to do it again. I just had the weft ends for the rest of the way because the other side doesn't have the clasped warp on it. And I thought that was kind of a neat effect. It's kind of this dark midnight indigo colored creep slowly progressing up from the bottom of the piece. I don't know, I just kind of like it. And then there was this little curl that didn't make it in. It got clipped. The good thing is it will find its way into some other art yarn someday, a little boucle curl there. That's kind of a redundancy there, isn't it? A boucle curl. I think boucle just means curl or curled. Anyway, here's the last one, and then we are done with the blanket, and it's just time to take final pictures. And look at all these ends. I actually don't throw this out because I'm a hoarder. No, because I saved that stuff. I put it in as inclusions in art yarns. I will sometimes use the ends from commercial yarn as like a stuffing for little amigurumi or something like that. But for any handspun yarn, art yarn or not, I save all the ends, and it's kind of like the eternal soup of yarn. There's definitely really old yarn in some of this that has been reused a few times. But here's the finished blanket. And I like how it turned out. I think that the colors are really nice that Beans picked out. She's got a really good eye for color, as you might have guessed. But what matters the most is that Beans really likes how it turned out, and I can't wait for her to get to use it this coming winter. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.